Who are the best franchises in the Super Bowl era on today's Peacock and Williamson?
NFL analyst Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson bring you expert NFL analysis every day in less than 30 minutes. Get an inside look into the NFL on the field and in the front office. With elite breakdowns, next-level analysis, and in-depth information only for the real NFL fans. This is Peacock and Williamson, and it starts now.
Welcome to the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. Brian Peacock alongside Matt Williamson at BD Peacock at Williamson NFL. Thanks, everybody, once again for making us your first listen on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. Have you ever dreamed of becoming an NFL GM, managing your own football franchise top to bottom? Then this game is definitely for you. Download the game. Just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the app stores. Our listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise in-game when using promo code LOCKEDON inside the game Ultimate Football GM. Matt, it's off-season mode right now for all the NFL teams, for all the listeners out there when they're getting their heads wrapped around their teams and the NFL at large in 2023 right now. But before you can go forward, I think you should go backward and learn a little from history, right? And what makes a successful franchise? So on today's podcast, we're talking about success in the NFL during the Super Bowl era, and some of the eras are a little too further back that you can't take that much from them. But I wonder what we might be able to learn about some of these successful franchises here. And you might want to preface this one for why we got the idea to do this show today.
Yeah, and folks over at The Athletic, I think I got this from, and I just cut and pasted it because I wanted to talk about it. They came up with a formula, and I guess they do this every year, and there's not a lot of change year to year, but the Chiefs just went up dramatically. But what they do is they like I said, there's a formula. If you win the Super Bowl that in any year, you get 11 points. If you lose the Super Bowl, you get 5 points. If you make it to the AFC or NFC championship game, you get 3 points. Making the playoffs gets you 1 point. Otherwise, you get a 0. So the small little problem I have with the formula is this year, look at the NFC North. The Lions have the first draft pick this year of teams that didn't make the playoffs. You know, they had a pretty good year. They were just outside the playoffs. Meanwhile, the Bears are picking first overall. Did the Lions and Bears have equal seasons? No, but they both get 0 points. So, oh well, making the playoffs what it's all about. But yeah. I mean, what they did is they've just accumulated points in these 57 seasons now, and who has been the most successful and least successful franchises. And then smartly, they figured out, what do you average per year? Houston hasn't been around as long as Green Bay. Baltimore hasn't been a franchise as long as the Bears. So a team like Baltimore looks a lot better when you look at it per season than their cumulative grade. But I thought it was pretty interesting, and needless to say, our two teams fared pretty well.
Yeah. The Steelers and the 49ers, the teams we cover, have had some success in the Super Bowl era, have some rings on their collective fingers, that is for sure. Let's start at the top then, huh?
Yeah. Let's start rolling through them, I think.
Oh, so this is why you wanted the Steelers are number one. That's why you wanted to do this today. Okay, I see. It didn't even dawn on me at first that this is why you wanted to do this podcast, just to show your dominance over me and the rest of the league here, with the 49ers coming in at a measly 4th on this list.
Well, I mean, 32 playoff appearances, 8 Final Fours, 2 Super Bowl losses, 6 Super Bowl trophies. Pretty strong. They also mentioned the last decade, and we could talk about that at the end too. I should have said that when I brought this in. They also talk about the last 10 seasons. Well, the Steelers aren't at the top for the last 10 seasons, but they do average 2.04 points per season. So, Steeler fans, I'm so tired of hearing, boy, Tomlin can't win a playoff game. Steelers haven't won a playoff game in way too long. Since the Super Bowl era, the average Steelers season is not only do you get in the playoffs, but you have one more whole point than that. I mean, that's crazy. A below average year is just getting to the playoffs for the Steelers. It's somewhere in between getting to a championship game that's worth 3 points and getting in the playoffs at worth 1 is the average season. Quit whining, Steeler fans.
And this is just the Athletics way of doing things. And you might
Oh,
look
yeah,
at
yeah.
the franchises and think, maybe this should be weighted more, and this is a little different. This is a
Mhm.
little different. But it's amazing that after all these years, and we've seen a Pittsburgh Steelers dynasty in the 70s, we saw a Niners dynasty in the 80s, we saw a Cowboys dynasty in the 90s. Depending on what your idea of a dynasty is, but I think those four teams count, and then the New England Patriots, who are have the second most points
Yeah.
in this.
1 point behind the Steelers.
1
the
point
Patriots.
behind the Steelers after their dynastic run that they just went through. That is definitely over. And there's the same head coach there, but that run is over. And all it'll take is one more playoff appearance from the Patriots when the Steelers don't get there, and they'll be in the top spot.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty impressive by the Patriots, maybe even more so than the Steelers, because the thing that stands out to me about the Steelers is there's very few down years. I mean,
Yes.
I'm almost 50 years old. I've seen 3 head coaches in my lifetime. The latest one, Tomlin, does not ever have a losing season. He doesn't have tons and tons of rings. So you get a lot of ones in there, made the playoffs,
Hold on, Matt. I want to pause you right there.
Yeah.
So let's put something into perspective here. You've seen 3 head coaches for the Pittsburgh Steelers in your lifetime.
Yeah.
There is a 3-year-old out there who has seen 3 head coaches now for the Houston Texans.
Right. And they're not very high on this list. And maybe there's something to that. But think about the Patriots.
I think it's very clear head coaches, quarterbacks are going to have a little something to do with this on your list. And I've got another question for you later after we talk about some of these teams. But clearly there's a number 1 tier here, and they're the dynasty teams. They're the heavyweights, as they call them here.
Yeah.
And by the way, our guy from The Athletic, Mike Sando, we used to talk to him every week here on the show. We got to have him on this offseason because they do a lot of great work over there. To give him his props, and we reference a lot of stuff they do over there at The Athletic.
Yeah, Sando's great, and I'm excited to see him. I'll probably have a beverage with him at the combine. So
there we go. Yeah,
yeah.
You can book us a podcast guest while you're at the combine.
I like it.
Rubbing elbows with Sando and maybe whoever else you see in the league.
So the Steelers had 3 head coaches, and they're all going to be Hall of Famers. 2 of them are already in. But the Patriots really weren't good until Brady Belichick. I mean, so half of that run by the Steelers, the Patriots had very little points. So they almost matched 57 years worth of brilliance, greatness in half the time.
Yeah. They had the one quick blip in the 80s.
Yeah, a little bit. Right.
And it's wild because when you look at the Steelers, the Cowboys, the 49ers, they won in multiple decades, went to Super Bowls in multiple decades.
Yeah.
And the New England Patriots is basically all on the power of the one Belichick Brady run.
Right, which is an unbelievable run. Dallas, Jimmy Johnson, I think, is a Hall of Famer. Landry's already in, Walsh, Shanahan, there's some great different eras of these heavyweights, except for the Patriots.
Looking at the next group of teams, and I was a little bit surprised when I saw, as they call them, the light heavyweights here in The Athletic. And you got to go to theathletic.com and check out this article and all the great stuff they do over there, including podcasts and things. And so I do love the work that they're doing, including our guy, Mike Sando, who did not do this article.
No,
the Green Bay Packers are the 5th team on this list, and they top the light heavyweights. And I was a little bit surprised at the gap. I would have guessed the Packers were closer to the top than this. There's a large gap between those top 4 franchises: the Steelers, the Patriots, the Cowboys, the 49ers, and then number 5 in the Green Bay Packers.
Yeah, I mean, half a point difference in this, in an exercise like this, where the leaders at 2.04 is massive, and it's pretty clear that those 4 belong by themselves. Green Bay is noticeably behind at 5, So, I mean, being over 1 is really impressive. That means your average year, you go to the playoffs, your average year. I mean, and the Chiefs are gaining some steam here.
All right, next, we're going to get a little further down the list here. The light heavyweights, the teams that, and I think there's some fan bases out there that probably are shaking their heads knowing, like, I'm not going to hear my team's name for a little while when it comes to this list and success during the Super Bowl era, and maybe tie it all together with what we can learn here from these teams and the success that is had from certain franchises in the NFL. I think we've started to dip our toes in some of those topics already on today's episode of Peacock and Williamson, which is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. You've heard us talk about the Ultimate Football GM game app. It's a mobile app. It is super fun to play. We competed as hosts together on it. Chris Carter, shout out, the host of Locked On Steelers, was the champion. And it's so much fun to build your own franchise. And in this game, it's not about playing the game. It's about building your franchise. It's about building that juggernaut. So this episode really ties in well with what you can do on Ultimate Football GM? Can you put together that 25-year dynasty that would rival the New England Patriots? Well, it's your turn to give that a shot. And with Ultimate Football GM, you're responsible for controlling everything with the dynasty, or the destiny and the dynasty of your football franchise, hiring the right coaches and coordinators, trading players, navigating through free agency, and of course the NFL draft, all the ups and downs of a season, all in a challenging and realistic game world. Ultimate Football GM is completely free and playable offline, play on the go, and as you and when you want to. And Locked On listeners, including the Peacock and Williamson Show listeners, can get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code Locked On inside the game. That's Locked On, one word, all caps. So make sure you check it out today. Download the game. Just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the app stores. That's ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. Okay, Matt. Let's keep this going here. We got the Green Bay Packers to come in number 5 on this list as a successful franchise during the Super Bowl era. And they've had a lot of really good teams, and they've had multiple eras of really good teams. But their success, I think the difference is their success was not as sustained each time as some other franchises.
3 Hall of Fame quarterbacks. I mean, they've had very high moments, but they've also had some downtimes too. Some stretches there where they weren't going to playoff games.
And you know, the Rodgers era, you get a Hall of Fame quarterback. They've only got the 1 Super Bowl.
Yeah.
And you look at the Favre era, and it was really, they were so good, but there were so many other good teams in the NFC that were all battling each other and knocking each other off. And it was like whoever, like the NFC Championship game in the 90s was the Super Bowl, right? So if it was the Cowboys, the Niners, the Packers, that was the game, because whoever won that was going to go dominate in the Super Bowl. And so they kind of knocked each other off from getting those some more rings potentially for the Packers in that time. And probably the same could be said for, you know, if it wasn't for the 49ers and the Packers, the Cowboys would have more rings. If it wasn't for the Cowboys, the Niners would have more rings.
No question. And I think the Raiders are interesting because their highs are very, very high. But the end of the Al Davis era, they were like the worst franchise in the league. I mean, Jamarcus Russell times, you know?
Yeah. So around, I don't know, 30 years ago, maybe, this list would have been like Steelers 1, Raiders 2 even.
Yeah.
Niners,
Cowboys,
Raiders.
Dolphins. Yeah, right. So we don't have a ton of time. It's a long list. Maybe we'll just buzz through each tier so everyone knows where they land.
Right.
So I think the third segment I'd like to talk about who's the best and worst of the decade and who's the best and worst per season, because there's a team at the bottom I really need to talk about.
And so some of these teams are going to start to get, you know, kind of all jammed into the middle here a little bit. And the rest of the light heavyweights are the Denver Broncos, Los Angeles Rams, and the Kansas City Chiefs now jumping up into the light heavyweight era. And who knows, maybe they'll even end up in the heavyweight era, depending on how many, or the heavyweight tier, depending on how long this goes. And if this really turns into a true dynasty with the Kansas City Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid, which is really, Matt, starting to look like that's the way it's going to go. Like this is different. There was Dane Brugler, again, of The Athletic. Shout out The Athletic, doing good work.
Good stuff. Yeah.
But he was just on Twitter. He referenced that Bryce Young in the NFL draft this year is his comp isn't even a football player. It's Steph Curry. And I was like, you know, a lot of people use Steph Curry as the comp for Patrick Mahomes too, because it's just a way to look at it. It's like, this guy's different, and maybe you don't know what to do with him at first, and then you realize how much of an all-time great he is, but he plays a little differently. And then I was thinking, I was like, well, you know what? I don't think the Curry comp works anymore for Mahomes anyway. So the Curry comp is back open because Patrick Mahomes might be heading toward the Michael Jordan comparison. Like that's the way he's going because of the way he does things and the way he physically can dominate the game. Whereas, you know, you might say, Tom Brady's Michael Jordan. Tom Brady's more like Bill Russell, collecting rings. I think with a singular, what he's able to do and physically how he's wowing people the way he does it, I think the NBA comp for Patrick Mahomes might be heading a little bit closer to the Michael Jordan era.
So that's funny you brought this up because, first of all, just to get back to this list super quick, in a 57-year sample size, the Chiefs went from 14th last year all the way up to 9. So they keep this up, they're going to be rocketing up the boards. I don't think I've ever said it on our podcast, surprisingly, but my comparison for Mahomes is a combination of Magic Johnson and Sandy Koufax. I've got so many people writing me back about that. You know,
dude, that's a great one. Magic Johnson, and I mean, we could probably do a whole podcast just on weird.
We could. That's why I almost didn't mention it. You know,
Magic Johnson, just the way he delivers it, right? The way he delivers his
creativity.
The creativity, you don't really see that a lot.
Court
I like that
vision.
Magic,
Sandy
still
Koufax, physically imposing. Koufax he has every pitch in the book, can paint the corners, poise.
The Koufax comp, though, you would hate the Koufax comp for Mahomes because that would mean his career was cut short due to injury.
Yeah, I'm just talking style of play.
Right. So that, if you want to take it all the way, but I can see that. I like that a lot.
All right, let's get back to this.
Yeah. We got the middleweights here. The New York Giants, Indianapolis Colts, Miami Dolphins, Washington Commanders, the Minnesota Vikings, Philadelphia Eagles. These are teams that have had some success, but not a lot of sustained success. You've got the Miami Dolphins where they won a lot of football games with Dan Marino, but never won the title. But then there was other really good Dolphins teams, before that with going back to the still only undefeated team.
Yeah, and I just want to point out one team in that tier. The Giants have 4 Super Bowls and have been to 5, but they've only gone to the playoffs 17 times. When they go, they make it count, but they don't go that often.
Yeah, no, very true. And in the Eli era, they've got a couple of rings, but they weren't like this juggernaut team. It was just like those 2 years. They were like, man, this team.
Yeah. Wow. Before Dayball, they were like the worst franchise in the league.
Right. Yeah. And they went down and they were very bad. And then they came back up again. And then it happened again. They had the Phil Simms era. And then they went down and they came back up again.
Right.
The welterweights here. Okay. The Buffalo Bills is 16. Then you got the Seahawks, the Ravens. I'm surprised how low the Ravens are, but again, this is cumulative, right? So when you start to look at points per season, that's when you start to get into it. And I think teams, fans out there, listeners, will start to realize that we're getting to some teams here that have had some trouble winning the big one, aside from the Baltimore Ravens, but they're here because they have won, but they've also not had as long of a history to win a bunch of games.
Absolutely.
Tampa Bay Bucks, like the Seahawks, have won one, but then had some really lean years for a very long time previously. The Chicago Bears, similar, only they won a while ago and then have lean years since. Tennessee Titans, New York Jets, Cincinnati Bengals at 23. And then I'll just run through the end of it, and we can have some more of the takeaways here. Then the New Orleans Saints at 24. And then you go down to even further down the list here in the lightweights, which is the Atlanta Falcons, Los Angeles Chargers, Cleveland Browns, Carolina Panthers, and
some expansion teams in this neighborhood.
And then even I thought the lightweights was actually going to be the bottom tier. But it's actually the tier 6 featherweights is the bottom tier, and really just have won nothing, and that's the Arizona Cardinals. I'll take that back with the Cardinals has won a little bit here, but they've been so bad for a long time too. Before that. Before the 2000s, Jacksonville Jaguars, Detroit Lions, and Houston Texans. Only 6 appearances only 6 points for the Houston Texans.
Brutal. I mean, at least they're an expansion team. I mean, the Lions don't have that to complain about.
The Lions have been around this whole time, and they're the second worst. I mean, that is the ultimate ineptitude with the Detroit Lions. And Lions fans out there probably knew that was going to be the case.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so we gave everyone the list. Why don't we come back and talk about points per season and as well as where the best and worst are in the last decade? Because there's one team I do want to stress that has no excuse for being as bad as they are.
Absolutely. We'll wrap it up next. Success in the Super Bowl era. Thanks, everybody, for making Peacock and Williamson your first listen every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Make sure you check out everything else the network has to offer. Your team is covered every single day at Locked On, not just your NFL team, but your favorite Major League Baseball team, your favorite NBA team, your favorite college teams as well are covered right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. And make sure you check out Locked On NFL Draft daily as well. The new Locked On NFL Draft with Damian and Keith as the new hosts there. It's going to be a really good show through the draft season. Okay. Let's wrap this up, Matt, with the success in the Super Bowl era. Do you want to go first to the
points by season? Just a couple
by season, It really puts the Baltimore Ravens in a better light. That's the real outlier on this list.
Yeah, I mean, again, the Steelers and Patriots at the top. Their average year is finishing the season basically in the divisional round, somewhere between the championship round and the playoffs. That's their average year since they've started. And the usual guys are at top. But the Ravens go all the way up to 6 in terms of success per season. I think that's really impressive. I mean, I think they're a phenomenal organization. There aren't any others high on the list that are newer teams, and maybe there's something to be said for stability. The Steelers, Patriots, the Cowboys, not a lot of change in the organization. But I wanted to go to the bottom. So in terms of per season, the Lions are last, which they've had a lot of time to try this, so they're the worst per year. Arizona's second to last, Houston. But here's the one I have a problem with. The 29th are the Chargers. They've had Dan Fouts, Phillip Rivers, Herbert. They have more than their share of Hall of Famers, LaDainian Tomlinson, Antonio Gates. You're 29th most successful organization in the league. Is that just who this team is? Is Herbert always going to be paddling upstream? Is it just a losing organization?
And you got to believe that. I think dollar signs was part of it.
Yeah.
Dollar signs is probably all of it, of them moving to Los Angeles. But competitively, does it help them? Is that the thing that's going to get them over the hump? Was San Diego somehow, maybe a little smaller market, maybe holding
they don't
them
much of a home field advantage.
So I don't know. I don't know if it's going to help them or not. But they've just been that team where they could never get over the hump, even though they've had really good teams and really good quarterbacks, and they've had teams that should have been better. And then when they did get to the Super Bowl, it got completely blown out in 1994.
Right. I mean, they have one Super Bowl appearance. They've been to the Final Four 3 times. They've only been to the playoffs 15 years with those quarterbacks. Like, that's pretty
funny?
bad.
That it wasn't even a top 5 quarterback in their history that actually got them to the Super Bowl. It was Stan Humphrey.
No, it's Stan Humphrey. They're right.
Yeah.
I remember I mean, they were, and then they got destroyed by your Niners after beating my Steelers in the AFC Championship game.
And by the way, it should be said, the Cleveland Browns history is attached to the Cleveland Browns, not the
the Ravens.
Not the Ravens.
Right.
And, the Colts are so I don't know.
There's 2 versions of the Browns mixed into one.
Right.
And the Ravens are only in Baltimore. The Colts are Indy and the Colts. The Baltimore Colts and Indy, because it was the same organization that moved.
Yeah, so the Colts are the Colts, the Browns are the Browns, and the Ravens are their own thing, not attached to the old Browns history.
Yes.
So,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, good.
I was just, just over the last 10 years, I wanted to look at these teams because I think that's pretty telling as well. The Chiefs fare pretty well.
So from the 2013 season through the 2022 season,
Patriots are still unbelievably dominant. So they're at 4.6, or I'm sorry, they're at 46, which means on average, they're at 4.6. I mean, think about that. I mean, you get 5 points for going to the championship game, and the Patriots haven't been good for a couple years. So in the last 10 seasons, their average year is a trip to the championship game. That's the average. That's bonkers.
Is that 2 Super Bowls in that decade?
I would have to think about that. I don't know for sure.
My brain will hurt if I try to think of that. It's too hard. But they had 3 before 2013 at least, right? 2000.
Yeah, I think so.
7,000. Yeah. So
they've had 3 down years in those 10. The last 3 non-Brady.
Yeah.
And the Chiefs are 2. Like, if we did the last 5, the Chiefs have 37 points. So I know they went to the playoffs the year they drafted Mahomes. But if they would narrow this down to 5, they would have like 3 points. They'd have like 35 points in 5 years. So their average season in the last 4 years would be better than the AFC Championship game. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean,
right.
Patrick Mahomes has never played a road playoff game. And he's been in the AFC Championship game every year he's been a starter. And the year before that, when he was a rookie and Alex Smith was the quarterback, they were in the playoffs then too.
Right. I mean, so their short stretch of dominance is unbelievable. And then we got Seattle, Philly, the Rams, Denver, Green Bay, San Fran. So my Steelers are down to 11. They don't look so good in the last 10 years. But the last 10, who's at the bottom here? We got, the Jets have 0 points in the last 10 years. Never been to the playoffs. Browns
Congratulations
have been once.
to the Browns, who had 1 point. The Lions and the Bears each had 2 points. So, and the Commanders 2 points. Cool. So, yeah, at least they didn't have 0 points like the New York Jets. I mean, I feel bad for Jets fans, Lions fans, Browns fans, of course, too.
Oh, man.
But I feel like I feel less bad for the Browns fans. I feel like they've got something I don't know, maybe not. I just feel like
it's
when I
pretty
think
rough.
of the teams are like, which team would I not want to be a fan of? I feel like the Jets and the Lions would be the toughest ones, even more so than the Browns. But maybe I'm
Yeah.
I mean, the Browns was rough because you get your heart ripped out as your team leaves, then you come back and you're just terrible anyway.
So I'm not making fun of Browns fans, but I worked for the organization. I was part of the organization for a year. Then we were really bad. And they're right up the road from my hometown. It's like a lightly over 2-hour drive. And I kind of told my buddies when I really got to know the Browns organization that Steeler fans and Browns fans are like identical twins with the exact same DNA. And one of them went to a strong home, 2 parents, middle class, well educated, had some benefits, but they were tough and brought up right, where the poor kid that went to the Browns side didn't have, daddy wasn't there. Mommy maybe did some drugs on the side, put cigarettes out on you.
What you're saying is
they
the
had a rough
Steelers,
go of it.
the Steelers are Arnold Schwarzenegger and the Browns are Danny
DeVito.
DeVito. Yeah.
Right. Like they're inherently the same and their heredity's the same. The environment's just been much more difficult in one versus the other.
A couple of takeaways looking at this list. Matt, you nailed one with the coaching thing. I think it was just, that's amazing that you've only seen 3 coaches in your lifetime for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And some teams have seen 3 in the last 3 consecutive years in the NFL. So stability, I'd probably put number 1 because stability you can control.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I would put that number 1 for these franchises. There's some luck involved with some of these other things because sometimes if you didn't hire the good coach, you wouldn't have kept the good coaches that long either. So you got to hire the right guy.
Sure.
And so that's
ability / ownership.
Yes. And so, you put the ownership on that. But then you look at some of these other teams and it kind of dawns on me when you look at the history of the league and what makes teams successful and what makes teams not unsuccessful. And I always talk on this podcast about how the most important thing you can have in the NFL is that head coach quarterback. And you got that. And we're seeing teams that have that and they're in it. You're in it every year. And some things can happen on the rest of your roster, but that can carry you. And, no better example than the Kansas City Chiefs this year, where you lose some big pieces. Oh, is it a soft rebuild here, reloading? And it's like, no, they're still the Super Bowl champions because they've got that. And it makes everybody else in your roster play up. But I kind of like, is it quarterback? Is it coach? Because I look at Hall of Fame head coaches and I look at all these teams that had dynasty runs. And I think, is there any Hall of Fame head coaches that didn't have Hall of Fame quarterbacks too?
I know. I mean, you have to have both. And I mean, Andy Reid's a good example. I mean, look how much success he had with the Eagles, with the Hoyings and Kevin Cobb, and McNabb was good, but he's certainly not Mahomes. A lot of championship games, TO year with the Eagles, really had a successful run with Philadelphia. Now he's an all-time great because he's got the quarterback. Or Shula. Shula was great through the 70s, gets Marino, takes the team to a new level. Maybe that's not the best example because they didn't win Super Bowls. But you know what I mean? Some of these guys that once they get the quarterback, they've already have a great thing in place, One other note I wanted to throw out too, though, is enjoy it while you can. I mentioned I was born in 1973. And when I started to really understand football, the Raiders, Giants, Dolphins, and Washington were all winning a lot of games. Parcells, Shula, Madden, Flores, Gibbs. Well, in the last 10 years, they all have 2 points each. They've done nothing. It doesn't last most times.
Yes. Enjoy that success in the NFL when you can get it. And if there's something to point to, starts with ownership, but you got to find the right coach. You got to find the right quarterback, of course. And so that's what we're going to be focused on a lot for some of these franchises that are trying to rebuild, trying to do big things in the 2023 offseason to get back to the Super Bowl. Thanks everybody for making us your first listen on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team is covered. And of course, Matt and I back tomorrow right here, Peacock and Williamson.